Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today and share our recent work on designing AI-assisted learning technologies. In particular, I'll share two stories on knowledge engineering and cognitively aligned interface design. And I hope this helps open more discussions on when and how to use AI in education. Learning is happening everywhere in college and K-12 classrooms, at home or at workplaces. However, lots of challenges still exist in helping people reach their highest potential. I'll share a few examples of challenges. Taking the University of Michigan, that's where I come from, as an example, many of our gateway courses have an annual enrollment of more than 2,000 students, making personalized support intractable. And according to the Future of Jobs report by the World Economic Forum in 2023, about 6 in 10 workers will require training before 2027, but only half of them are seen to have access to training opportunities. The National Center for Education Statistics have shown that middle schoolers' reading and math achievements are declining in the past 10 years and are continuing declining. And in workplace training, for example, in teaching hospitals, which is also one of our study sites, about 92% of general surgery residents report underprepared for independent practice when they graduate from residency. So we've seen some examples of challenges, and an overarching question for my research is how to support human skill acquisition with technologies. Since the rise of generative AI, there has been a lot of discussion on whether GenAI can solve the problems we have mentioned. For example, providing tutoring, enhancing teaching capacity, providing training opportunities. And we've seen excitement, hype, doubt, and conflicting views about its role in teaching and learning, and I'd like to share some recent results. Many reports and surveys are showing that students are clearly using generative AI for problem solving and output creation. Different surveys internationally cite a percentage of about 70 to 85% of college students using generative AI for homework. There are also huge demands in the market as we see the rise of hundreds of generative AI-powered edtech startups to streamline teacher workflows or provide personalized tutoring. However, the evidence on using such tools for learning is rather mixed. There are a handful of studies that show positive influence. For example, this is a randomized trial done by a team at Harvard showing an AI tutor that is carefully designed leads to better learning than in-class active learning. This is done in a college physics course. And here's another study done by a team here at Stanford showing that giving human tutors real-time AI suggestions can improve students' learning, and this is done in K-12 math. However, there are more studies that show negative influence of generative AI. For example, this paper by UPenn shows that giving students AI access without guardrails can improve performance in high school math, but it reduces learning when AI access is taken away. And here's another study by a team from MIT showing that when people use an AI assistant for essay writing, they show fewer brain activities. Moreover, a handful of papers published this year in the AI in Education conferences shows that when AI is used to generate hints or provide tutoring, about 30 to 50% of the hints and tutoring dialogues have quality issues. So today, instead of answering the question of does GenAI work in education, to which we have really seen mixed results, I'd like to start asking and answering another question. Given these tools are increasingly used by teachers and students in teaching and learning, how to make generative AI work in education. And we'll come back to the original question at the end of the talk. And I will share two stories and two main insights from my work. The first one is knowledge engineering, which I believe is a key in developing AI-powered educational software. And the second is creating cognitively aligned interfaces. So let's start with knowledge engineering. By knowledge engineering, I mean concerted efforts to understand the cognitive requirements for performing a task. Through knowledge engineering, we could achieve higher cognitive fidelity, which will enable better tutoring, feedback, and targeted practice. The concept of knowledge engineering is not new, and it can date back to the development of cognitive tutors about a decade ago, which was motivated by this challenge called Bloom's 2 Sigma Challenge. So what is the Bloom's 2 Sigma Challenge? It shows that one-on-one tutoring is more effective than conventional classroom instruction with 1 teacher and 30 students. So in this graph, the x-axis is the students' achievement scores, and the most flat curve is conventional classroom instruction with 1 teacher and 30 students. And the most steep curve is one-on-one tutoring. So this graph shows that an average student who receives one-on-one tutoring, who would achieve an achievement score of this, performs 2 standard deviations better than an average student who receives a conventional classroom instruction. And this is what we call the Bloom's 2 Sigma Challenge. However, providing one-on-one tutoring to every student is impractical, and this motivates the development of AI-based personalized tutors. In particular, cognitive tutors, which was first introduced in the 1990s. In a series of studies from 1997 to 2013, research shows that cognitive tutors lead to 2 times better learning than traditional algebra curriculum across many schools over 1 school year's time. So what are cognitive tutors? An important concept behind cognitive tutor is the cognitive model, which composes of production rules. So to create a cognitive tutor, we would first extract a comprehensive cognitive model to solve the problem, and then we can create an AI agent that can solve this problem based on the cognitive model, and this is the earliest rule-based AI. And third, this AI agent would mimic an expert's thought process and provide feedback and hints to learners. So let's see a concrete problem. Assuming that I want to create a tutor to teach someone this fraction addition problem, right? And then, so in order, following the process of creating a cognitive tutor, we would first break down this into 3 steps. And then we can program an AI agent that solves the problem following these steps, who can provide feedback to novices learning to solve this problem. And in this case, let's say the example 3 steps include find the least common denominator and add the numerators, keeping the denominator common, and then simplify the resulting fraction. Another important concept in cognitive tutors is cognitive fidelity. So now I have a question for you all. Assuming that you are teaching someone to find the least common denominator, if they enter 12 or 24, would you give them the same feedback? Anyone wants to share what feedback would you give if they enter 12 or 24 here?
Yes.
You would like to use that as a teaching moment to tell them about LCMs.
Yeah, so that could be a teaching moment. So 24 is a common denominator, but it is not a least common denominator. But what if they enter 10? Would you give, what feedback would you give them in comparison to other errors? Yeah.
I would review, I guess, how to get that least common denominator, because I think it also depends on, have they learned this a while ago and now they're reviewing it, or is this their first time learning it? Because I would focus a lot more, especially with the 24 and 10. If it's their first time learning it, I might actually let the 24 go, because they're just learning the process, versus if they're learning it very early. And if they do 10, I'd be like, hold out, like, well, how do we, and go back, how do we do this particular process? Or maybe go into the teaching stage again because maybe they didn't fully get it, or do they need a reminder? So it really just depends on the student.
So the feedback you give the student could depend on their prior learning experiences, and also based on the different answers they enter, you may give them different feedback. For example, if they say 10 here, it seems like they are adding these two denominators up, which is a common mistake, instead of finding the least common denominator. So this is what we mean by cognitive fidelity. Cognitive fidelity suggests that in the AI tutor's cognitive model, if skills are sufficiently broken down and common misconceptions are anticipated, it will provide more personalized feedback to the student. And then cognitive fidelity, I see a hand there.
Would you like us to be questions to the end, or do you prefer questions during your
If there are clarification questions, I'm happy to answer now.
I'll leave it to the end.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So cognitive fidelity thus enables deliberate practice and personalized feedback. We can imagine that with lower fidelity, the tutor could give coerced feedback and more general practice based on the student's mistakes. But with a higher cognitive fidelity model, with a cognitive model with higher fidelity, the tutor could give more personalized and concrete feedback. For example, improve here by doing X, Y, Z, and more targeted practice based on the student's weaknesses, making learning more efficient. So that's a review of that's a review of cognitive tutors. And now I wanted to come back to our use of generative AI in education. So I argue that when using generative AI, we still need knowledge engineering efforts in order for the AI tutor to provide personalized and effective feedback. And I will now share an example that GenAI can be used to provide feedback on student writing and improve writing performance with knowledge engineering. This work is led by my PhD student, Xinyi Lu, in collaboration with Phyllis Zhu, Mitchell Dudley, Larissa Stano, and it's recently condition accepted to Kite 26. This study was done, yeah.
On your previous read, when you were saying like knowledge engineering, are you saying based on like rule-based where we program this into the AI, or are you saying based on like AI reasoning?
Can you say the question again?
So when you were talking about knowledge-based reasoning, were you talking about like the AI is doing the reasoning to find these rules, or this is programmed into the AI?
Oh, it is programmed into that. So I meant that experts would engage in this knowledge engineering process so that this can be served to the AI to provide feedback. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that. So this study was done in Econ 101, which is a large introduction to economics class at the University of Michigan. And this course has several short essay assignments. For example, find a news article in the last 3 months that contains market failure, analyze the market failure, and propose a solution to it. It's an open-ended task where students would find different articles, identify different market failures, and propose different solutions. But they share a similar reasoning process for the market analysis. A little more context of the course, there are about 360 students every semester, 11 to 12 TAs, and for every writing assignment, the students first submit a draft, and the TAs provide feedback on the first draft. Students revise them and submit the revised draft. Only the revised draft will be graded on record. Through a semester of co-design and iterative testing with instructors and TAs, we developed the system FeedbackWriter, which is a system for the TAs to provide feedback on students' written essays. And I would first play a demo of the system. So a cornerstone of the system is the rubrics we provide for it to generate feedback. And in this case, it's a checklist representation of the reasoning process. And we engaged in an iterative design process with instructors to improve the cognitive fidelity. So as we already mentioned earlier, when the knowledge requirements are more specific, the feedback can be more targeted and concrete. Here I show some examples. On the left column, it shows a lower fidelity version of the requirement. For example, explain why the good is a negative externality, or explain why the good is an artificially scarce good. And then a higher fidelity version incorporates the expert's reasoning process. For example, in order to explain why the good is a negative externality, it has several steps. Identify the decision makers, identify who or what are not decision makers but harmed, and address the differences between the free market outcome and the efficient outcome. So with this improved version of the rubric or the success criteria, the system makes a judgment for every criteria and generates a feedback message. Another important design consideration is that the feedback message should not reveal the expected answer. We made sure that the feedback messages were generated as hints instead of answers. To examine the influence of what we call this AI-mediated feedback, that is when TAs receive AI suggestions when providing feedback to students, we ran a randomized controlled trial in this class with 360 students and 11 TAs in winter 25. That is this time last year. And so about 1,400 essays were provided feedback using the system. So the class is first divided into two groups. In the experimental condition, the TAs used FeedbackWriter system, which is our system to provide feedback. And in the baseline condition, the TAs used a baseline system with the same rubrics and historic feedback, but no AI. And then we had outcome measures, including the students' revised draft quality. So as we mentioned, they first submit a first draft, they receive feedback, and then they revise the draft. So we measure the revised draft quality in comparison to the first draft, and also we had a post-test after the revision period. And we did this, we reversed the condition for writing assignment 2, so this gives us both between and within subject comparison. And this is what the baseline system looks like. So the TAs can freely add comments, and they have access to the same rubrics and historic feedback as in the FeedbackWriter system. And now I would like to talk a little bit about our outcome measure. So the main outcome measure is the essay quality. We use an AI judge to assess the quality of both the first and the final drafts. So an AI judge makes a decision of satisfying, that is 1 or missing 0, for every rubric item. And we compared the AI judge's accuracy with an expert instructor, and it achieves an accuracy around 85% using 3 different models, including GPT-4o, GPT-5, and Gemini 3 Pro. Another reason for using the AI judge is that we found human judges have higher between-reader variability than the AI judge, and it was impractical for one person to rate all of the 1,400 essays. So here's what we found. Students who received the AI-mediated feedback produced significantly higher quality revised drafts than students who received human-only feedback. So in this case, in this graph, the blue bars are the AI condition, and the orange bars are the baseline condition with human-only feedback. So the difference in the FeedbackWriter condition is significantly bigger. That indicates the improvement is significantly bigger than the baseline condition. Yes.
On the previous slide about 85-87% compared to experts, an instructor versus TAs, like who is the expert that you compare?
Yeah, that's instructor.
Just a related question. For the difference there, have you looked at the correlation of that with whether it's an AI judge or a human judge? Like, is the AI disproportionately making those errors in favor of the AI case?
So for these ones, All of the essays were randomly sampled from 2 conditions, so we didn't see a systematic difference between the 2 conditions.
So what I mean is a correlation of these errors. So like when the AI disagrees with the human judge, are those errors favoring the
one condition than the other?
Right.
Let me think. So that is to say, when this when we use the AI judge to when we analyze the errors of the misalignment, whether there's a difference between the 2 conditions. I don't know the answer on the top of my head. I don't know whether we compared that or not. But from what I recall, we did cross-check the 2 conditions, and it didn't. I don't recall a difference between the 2 conditions in terms of that. And another note here is that people may be thinking about the generation evaluation bias, but that is often when the same model is used to generate and to evaluate the text the same model generates. But in this case, all of the texts were written by the students, and the feedback was only indirectly influencing what the students were implementing in their revised version. Yes?
Related to that, with these 3 different models, the 15% that they disagree with the expert, they sort of correlated making the same 15% disagreement, or is it kind of small?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I don't think we made that comparison across these 3 models, but I think that's something that would be good to check. Okay, so coming back to the results, we found that the students who received AI-mediated feedback produced significantly higher revised drafts than the students who received human-only feedback. The effect size is 0.5, which is equivalent to moving a student from the 50th percentile to the 70th percentile in comparison to the student receiving human-only feedback. And we also found that when the TAs adopted more AI suggestions, the revision quality is higher. So that correlates the interactions the TAs have in the system with the improvement on the writing quality we're seeing. And I want to briefly summarize what we think makes the FeedbackWriter system effective. First, we iteratively refined the rubrics with instructors so that the rubrics accurately represent the knowledge requirements for the task. And with such detailed rubrics, AI does a comprehensive job checking knowledge requirements than human evaluators. And second, many TAs shared with us that even when they can identify the students' mistakes, it's harder for them to frame a supportive and personalized message without revealing the correct answer. And AI is better at crafting feedback messages, and it also gives them a starting place if they wanted to further modify the feedback. So I will show you some examples of AI-mediated feedback. Yes?
Did the students have access to the rubric?
That's a great question. So the students have access to a more generic version of the rubric. The students did not have access to the same rubric that the system is using to generate the feedback, because some of the rubrics are sort of revealing the correct answers. So the rubrics were, some of the rubrics were too detailed, as in what is the exact reasoning process the students need to engage in. The student had a more generic version which tells them what they need to include and what the deliverable should look like, but they didn't have the specific steps. So here are 2 examples of feedback targeting the same student mistakes. So in this case, the AI-mediated feedback tends to acknowledge the student's partial progress, saying you've identified the role of substitutes, but how might you further explore the relationship? Whereas the human-only feedback was more generic. As well, I would mention the idea of something. And also, the AI-mediated feedback tends to be more personalized to the student writing. For example, what would happen if insulin were priced at its marginal cost? Whereas the human-only feedback, sometimes we're using the templates they were provided, For example, consider the solutions discussed in class, what would happen, blah, blah. So with this study, with the promising results we're seeing in this study, we are continuing this work, and we are running a new study this semester that I'm really excited about. I don't have any results yet, but I want to share what we're trying to explore in this ongoing study. So with the TA revision data we collected from the 2 semesters, we improved this AI feedback engine. So what we're trying to do this semester in the class is that we will use an AI-only approach to offer feedback on students' first drafts within 24 hours. And then this would result in approximately 10 minutes. In our log data, each TA spends about 10 minutes on each student essay. So with that, that's about 60 hours of total TA time for this entire class. So then we ask this question: if we use AI to give feedback on the first drafts, can TA spend their time in a higher impact way? So in this semester, instead, we require each student to register for a 10-minute office hour to discuss the feedback they get. And we hope that this can help the students build interpersonal relationships with the instructional team. And then we hope that this face time with the instructors may provide extra motivation for students to engage with the course materials. So we're seeing that if we're seeing that AI can do some of these foundational tasks reasonably well with knowledge engineering, then maybe we can see an instructional paradigm shift where instructional resources and social capital can be reallocated to have higher impacts on students, in particular to have the instructional team build interpersonal relationships with the students.
I have a question. For students who are working on the writing task, do you know whether they use AI?
That's a great question. So that's something we've been looking into. So we've run this study for 2 semesters, winter 25 and fall 25. For those 2 semesters, we don't have a way to prevent them from doing that, but we did a small trick. Just from a data collection perspective, we used a white prompt in the prompt. So so that's a wrong quote by a wrong economist. So if they just directly use that, copy-paste that prompt into AI, then there will be something weird show up in the final delivery, and we can catch those. So the rate is about, I would say, 5 to 8 students out of 360 per essay that we cover. But I know that's a lower baseline. And starting from this semester, we're implementing a platform on our own for them to do the essay. So everything is logged through our platform. So it disables copy-pasting. We're also tracking whether they're doing retyping based on the logs we can retrieve. I know this is not preventing them from doing that, but this can give us some insights into the data collection process, which of these data is actually usable, which of them may just not be usable. Yes?
Tension between doing work better results, but then reduced learning, in the sense that they've made better work, but then they learned less. Can you talk about these results in that context?
Yes. That's a great question. So, in this, I mentioned in the study design that we had 2 measures. One is that they made the revision on the drafts, and the second is that we had an optional post-test. So I didn't talk about the post-test results here. So we didn't see a significant difference between the 2 conditions on the post-test. The post-test composes of multiple choice and open-ended questions covered in this writing assignment. We see a trend that our condition is slightly better, but it's not significant. My hypothesis is that for every knowledge component, let's say they're learning about how to identify, how to analyze and explain negative externality, they only have one opportunity to write and receive feedback. So I think the dosage may not be sufficient for us to see like a learning gain. But even I think it's quite exciting that they're making higher quality revisions. I think that's a signal of learning as well. Because the feedback, we're not directly telling them what to do. The feedback were more scaffolding messages that they also need to think through before they make the revision. But I agree that it would be even more exciting if we can see the post-test gain. And I think with these type of technologies, for example, the students are receiving feedback in a shorter time cycle, we might be able to implement more of these learning opportunities, and that may increase the dosage and for us to see a learning benefit. Yes, can we leave the question?
I can wait till you finish the presentation. I thought it was.
Not yet.
Okay, yeah,
Can we
no
leave the
worries.
question? Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, so that was the first story, knowledge engineered feedback provision. Now I want to share the second insight on creating cognitively aligned interfaces. So let's review the FeedbackWriter system design. It aligns with TA's cognitive process of feedback provision. Specifically, we break down the TA's cognitive processes into 3 steps. For every rubric item, they would identify the relevant sentences in the essay and then make a judgment on its satisfaction and then frame a feedback message. And then we design the interface to follow this process and display the AI intermediate results at every step so that TAs have the affordance to correct AI mistake at every step. For example, if they are unsatisfied with the highlight, they can repaint it, they can flip the judgment, and then they can modify the feedback message or completely dismiss it. And in addition to FeedbackWriter, I want to show a second example where we aligned the interface design with students' note-taking processes to retain necessary cognitive engagement and support comprehension during note-taking. This work is led by my PhD student Xinyue Chen in collaboration with Kunling Ran, Phyllis Zhu, and Nathan Yap, and received a Best Paper and Honorable Mention at CSW 25. We know that AI is increasingly used to facilitate cognitively challenging tasks, for example, helping us take notes during lectures or meetings. And this raises the question, is AI assistance always desired and beneficial? We answered this question through designing 3 variants of a note-taking system we call Note Copilot. And now I want to show you 3 versions of the tool, and I will ask you some questions in the end. So, assuming that you are in a live lecture like this, and you are using a tool like this on your computer to take notes. And this is the first version of the system called the automated AI version. So it's similar to commercial note-taking tools. You have a notepad on the right. You can take notes. And then the system generates a structured note block every 2 to 3 minutes. So it has these hierarchies and these bullet points. You can drag the note block over to the notepad as your own notes. So this is the automated AI version. It generates a structured block. And then in the intermediate AI version, the system generates 1 summary block after each speaking turn. So the summary block almost appears in real time. And then you can drag the note block over to the notepad as your own notes. And then in the minimal AI version, the system generates verbatim transcript for each turn. Again, they appear in real time. And you can again drag the transcript block to the notepad to make your own notes. And in all 3 versions of the system, you can take free notes in the notepad and ignore the AI output. So now I have a question for you all. Assuming that you use 1 version of this tool to take notes during a lecture like this one, and after the lecture, we quiz you on the content, which condition do you think would lead to the highest scores on the post-lecture quiz? So these are the 3 conditions. Automated AI, it has a structured block every 2 to 3 minutes. Intermediate AI, it has a summary block after every speaking turn. And minimal AI, it generates verbatim transcript.
The automated is generated from your notes specifically, not from the speaker, correct?
It's from the speaker, so it's like a lecture. Yeah.
It's not from your notes, because the image I was a little bit confused. You take notes and then it takes a summary of your notes?
No. It's based on what the speaker is saying. So it's like it's doing summary of the lecture. Yes.
I would guess the intermediate because it still forces you to think. Well, it allows you to listen during the actual talks, so you're not always taking notes. But I guess it depends on the person. Maybe some people are not distracted by taking notes. But if you are, then it allows you to listen at the same time. It forces you to figure out which pieces are relevant to your summary.
Cool. Yeah. So I think I have a weak vote for intermediate. And I see another hand.
So I would think that the automated AI would work better because that's doing what I hate to do. I would rather listen than take a note about everything, every detail that's being said.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get a show of hands. Who think it's automated AI? Okay. Who think it's intermediate AI? Okay. Who think it's minimal AI? Okay. I think I might have seen most hands for intermediate and a similar number for automated and minimal. So we ran a within subject study with 30 users and each experiencing all three variants. So they would watch a live lecture video and use one version of the system to take notes, and we quiz them in the end, and then we repeat it for 3 rounds. So in fact, we found that intermediate AI has the best performance and significantly higher than minimal AI, which is also significantly higher than automated AI. So now I have a follow-up question for you. Now I give you your notes you just took, and you can revise your answer to the quiz in any way you want. So which condition do you think would lead to the highest score now, given that you can refer to your notes and make changes to your responses? Who think it's automated? Okay, I think I see more hands on automated. Who think it's intermediate? Still some intermediate. And who think it's minimal? Okay, I think I see the most hands for automated now. So the answer is that still the trend holds when students can revise answers based on the notes. Intermediate is still the best. Automated is able to catch up with minimal AI, so there's no significant difference between automated and minimal anymore. And if we look at user interaction in the system, we found that people in the intermediate AI condition had the most interactions. For example, they had the most edits in the text editor, and then they also had the most behaviors of dropping AI content into the editor and structuring content. To summarize, the Note Copilot design aims to align with people's note-taking process as in this encoding and storage process. In particular, through these intermediate AI summaries, as reusable materials, it supplements people's encoding process during note-taking. So it reduces effort in recording information compared to minimal AI, whereas it keeps the interpretation and the structuring process as the users manipulate the intermediate summaries. And the study also shows that the encoding process influences the storage process. If people don't encode the information themselves, the retrieval becomes harder. That explains why, if you don't take the notes yourself, you rely on AI to do it for you. Even if you were given it to do the comprehension test, you do not perform as well as when you did it yourself. So these are the 2 insights I shared today on knowledge engineering and creating cognitively aligned interfaces using 2 domain-specific investigations. And I hope they may open up new conversations on using AI more broadly. And these 2 studies also open up new directions for my research group. So now let's return to our bigger picture of AI support in education. Traditionally, teachers are responsible for creating the learning environment students engage in. So in a regular classroom, this includes creating assignments, in-class activities, et cetera, and et cetera. So this ring indicates the interaction students have with teacher or expert-created environments, which can be limited since experts have limited capacity. With the advancement of technologies, students are getting broader exposure to learning environments or opportunities. So with the rise of generative AI, many tools are just as at people's fingertips. Today I showed that with knowledge engineering and cognitive aligned interface design, instructional capacity can be amplified. So expertise is first extracted through knowledge engineering, and it propagates into these different scalable formats. For example, AI feedback or AI tutoring. And so this lighter green ring here indicates that if we can extract experts' mental model, this can be propagated to provide other scalable formats of support for students, so that the students get so that instructional capacity and the students' interaction with good learning environments gets amplified. And we showed an example of FeedbackWriter on feedback provision, and our lab has developed systems to support instructor workflows on other tasks, including question creation and evaluation, and authoring intelligent tutoring systems for a variety of domains, from medical tasks to physical tasks to conversational training. And a next important question is how to make the knowledge engineering process more efficient so that expertise is more easily extracted. So in our previous investigations, it requires a lot of time working with instructors to get these expertise represented. So we're currently exploring methods to make expertise extraction more efficient with visualization methods, example selection methods, and simulated student solutions. And another question we're interested in is what are different knowledge representation methods, in particular when expertise is tacit. Another line of ongoing work is to examine the instructional paradigm shift, whether we can reallocate instructor time and social capital for deeper student engagement. For example, in the follow-up of the FeedbackWriter study, we examine whether TA's time can be better spent having face time with students instead of offering feedback behind a laptop. So with that, I'd like to propose two loops of teacher-AI collaboration when using AI in teaching. The inner loop is providing tool support to teachers through knowledge engineering and cognitive aligned interfaces. And the outer loop is exploring AI as teaching partners and examine how instructional resources and instructor social capital can be redistributed for deeper student engagement. And now let's look at students. Even after we introduce these guardrailed tools, students are still faced with more options for help than they had encountered before. And deep engagement and thinking process can be bypassed. That is shown in this, this red ring, assuming that students might have interactions with less good or less vetted learning environments. We posit this AI assistance dilemma in the Node Copilot paper I just talked about, and we're further exploring self-regulation support to raise students' awareness when seeking help from AI, and also providing motivational and social support through collaborative learning. With that, I'd like to come back to our original question, does GenAI work in education? I think through research and design, we can make it work towards providing personalized support at scale and enhancing deeper interpersonal engagement. And I think it will be productive to invest in these two loops of teacher-AI collaboration, both to provide tool support for teachers using knowledge engineering and cognitive aligned interface design, and also exploring this redistribution of instructional resources and teacher social capital. And at the same time, I think it will be productive to invest in how to help the students navigate the AI assistance dilemma. Okay, with that, I'd like to thank all of my wonderful students and collaborators and the funding sources and take questions.
This is the question I was thinking of earlier. So when I was applying to undergraduate schools, I remember interviewing at Columbia. And I talked to the admissions officer. She said, look, I got to tell you, that teaching here at Columbia is no better than it is at, and she named another school that's not quite as good as Columbia. I won't name. She said the teaching here is no better. That's not what you get from coming here. What you get from coming here are the students. You're going to learn from your fellow students. And I think my learning experience certainly, class is inscrutable, but I chat with students who've gone through the class or peers, and that is where much more learning happened. And so I'm trying to think that, like, in this context of learning is all about dissemination between pairs of individuals, tutors, versus a community of students learning from one another. Where do you see that trade-off? I think this just seems too transactional from the reality of learning.
Yes, I totally agree that this peer support, peer learning, and building community is very essential and is very important for that may be more important than learning these cognitive skills for when someone is in college. I think so. I think there are several aspects to it. So there are some. Cognitive, the work I've been doing focused on helping students acquire cognitive skills. So for example, I'm trying to solve this problem, and what are some foundational building block skills that I need to acquire in order for me to solve those problems. I do see that there are promises of using these tutoring approaches or scalable methods to prepare students for these building block methods, and so that they can engage in better collaboration. For example, like for authentic projects, students can engage with each other in open-ended projects and produce solutions. I do use collaborative learning a lot in my class. I think the reason is for students to get to know each other, because right now many students don't know their fellow students in the same classroom. But in terms from a skill acquisition perspective, for example, I have group projects in my class, and I just see that there are a lot of very foundational misconceptions or things that can be very wrong from the very beginning that can be easily corrected with these type of approaches before they go out to do those things. So I think, for example, if we don't prepare our students with these foundational skills, then the time they spent in doing these authentic projects could be a waste of their time. Like they are just not doing the right thing in this process. But I agree that the social aspect is very important as well. I think we can strike a balance, as in if we devote some of these resources to prepare students for these foundational building block skills, and we can also have more capacity to scaffold these social support and support students in doing collaboration.
Just a quick question. Looking beyond kind of the immediate knowledge engineering and alignment, could you comment also on how you would reimagine the classroom and the university around the direction the research is taking in your case?
Yeah, so I think the one immediate experiment we're trying is to see for some of these whether AI-based tools, AI partners carefully designed can provide these informational support. For example, if the students are having these frequent mistakes, they can easily get more practice on these skills. And then the instructor's time can be spent more towards helping them connect the content in the class with real-world problems, helping them, for example, build AI literacy or make career connections. I do think it's not a great use of people's time to point at these lower-level mistakes over and over again. And I think that's an immediate thought on how we might be able to distribute some of our instructional resources towards building relationships with students. And I think there's other aspects too. For example, supporting collaborative learning and helping students build social networks with other students.
Yeah, so to sum up, you're sort of looking at novices and how they acquire these foundational skills, and I think I still have some difficulty accepting that. But on the other side of things, you're also having a goal of augmenting, tutors or teachers, and how do you expect this to look like in the long term when this, tutors now have to teach with AI, and that's how they start, and they never get the experience of teaching without AI, and maybe some of that tacit expertise is like never really acquired for the tutors themselves.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is about, do we concerned about the tutors, the human tutors lacking the domain expertise to really support the students? Yeah, I think that's a good question too. That's something I haven't thought through. So in the economics class example, I can definitely see that happening. Like in the past, the TAs, they spent 10 minutes per student, and they think deeply about the student essay and give them feedback. And now this process is done by AI, but we still ask them to spend like FaceTime with the students to help them interpret things, but they may not engage in the same like deep thought processes when they are evaluating the work. I can see that being a problem, and I wonder whether it helps to also provide to provide training for the tutors themselves as well. But I think that's a great question. I haven't thought about that before, but yeah, thanks for asking that.
Thanks for really cool work. I have a question. So at the end, you mentioned the idea of like personalized AI for all these different students. What you're reporting on, at least in the sort of last project, is more or less the sort of like average effect. So I'm curious if like when you're looking at sort of the like distributional breakdown, is everybody moving in the same direction? Is it spread? And part of the reason why I'm asking is like, if we're measuring sort of average effects, but we're really interested in sort of individual outcomes, how do we think about getting at that? And part of the reason why I'm asking is also because I sort of expect that certain students will benefit more from these, maybe people who are more intelligent or better experienced with AI. So how do you think about these sort of heterogeneity effects?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question too. That is whether these technologies would benefit students from different backgrounds differently. I think that's something that we should put more efforts into studying. For example, whether, for example, we can divide the students into different, based on their performance, into lower performing or higher performing students, and see how they may receive the feedback differently. So from the literature, what we are seeing is that usually when students are from for students who are lower performing or from less privileged backgrounds, they don't engage with the materials as much as higher performing students, and they benefit more from like human support and motivational support. So I think that is what we're trying to get at with a new study. For example, if you get these feedback in a shorter turnaround, and then you can go to a TA to spend more face time with a person who might provide more motivation for you to engage with the feedback. So there is a Plus Tutor project at CMU. They are trying to look at also human AI complementary tutoring, and one of the findings is that for students from less privileged backgrounds, although the AI tutor may provide the right information, but they really need a human tutor there to provide the motivational support. I think this is what we're trying to get at with the new study. Here.
Thank you for your talk. This is really interesting work. Maybe building on the same thing as the previous question, I was wondering if you could help us maybe hypothesize the bounds of generalizability of these results. So if we think about generative AI being helpful in education, there are all sorts of different mediators, like the subject area that's being taught, like the kind of setting and the design of those lessons, maybe the age group, and in the case of the second study, maybe a different kind of task than taking lecture notes. So how do you anticipate some of these mediators affecting these results, or do you find them to be like generally stable across all these conditions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that. That's a great question. So in terms of generalizability, I think from a cognitive skill acquisition perspective, the system itself may not directly generalize to a new domain because people are acquiring different kinds of skills. What I think can be generalized is the process we used to build these systems. For example, the knowledge engineering process. We did a lot of experiments that was not used in the deployment study, but before we deployed the system, we did a lot of experimentation on different kind of fidelity of the success criteria or the rubric items, and the more concrete the rubric items are, the higher quality the feedback is. So I think engaging in this knowledge engineering process so that we can accurately represent experts' reasoning process into the system design is very important. And I think this insight would transfer to other contexts. And for the second study, I think this insight around cognitively aligned interface design would transfer to other contexts. So we are seeing here that the intermediate condition is somewhere in the middle. So there is a spectrum of you have AI automate most of your work versus you do most of the work yourself, and there is somewhere in between where AI gives you something that you can manipulate. So is this the optimal position? I'm not sure, but I think this is one position that is better than the other two ends. And I think this process of analyzing, for example, in terms of note-taking, there is encoding and storage, and we want to support encoding process to the most, and we want to retain the necessary cognitive engagement that we want them to interpret, but we want them to be able to interpret more efficiently with AI-generated summaries. I think this process of designing this interface would generalize.